According to FBI Special Agent John Edward Douglas, Lawrence Bittaker was the most disturbing individual for whom he'd ever created a criminal profile. And I believe that, especially from what I've gathered about the Toolbox Killers.
They touched Miss Ledford on the breast with the cold metal pliers. And if you listen to the tape, you'll hear those pliers being replaced in the toolbox a few seconds later.
Oh, what did you touch her on the breast for with a pair of pliers?
To shock her with the cold metal.
Once again, it's Murder and Mayhem Monday. Welcome back. My name is Franklin James, the serial author, and today I want to talk about two men who were literal partners in crime, but they were both deranged in their own ways. I'm talking about Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, the Toolbox Killers. Now, because there are two of them, I want to separate this video into two parts. First, I want to look at their childhood, right? Their upbringing and any events that may have influenced their decision making. And then in the second video, I want to examine their methodology, victimology, and psychopathy as a whole. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. So let's get into it. Lawrence Bittaker was born in Pittsburgh, PA on September 27th, 1940. His biological parents put him up for adoption when he was an infant, and apparently it was an unplanned pregnancy. So from the start, we can see how he'd likely experience abandonment issues as well as feeling unwanted. But I'll examine that more later in the video. Now, his father, George Bittaker, worked in the aviation industry, and the family was moving around a lot before they finally settled in California. And I questioned whether or not the instability of it all, the moving around from place to place, had an effect on Lawrence Bittaker. Because from what I gathered, children who frequently move around a lot tend to experience a sense of loss and grief, leaving behind old habits, their friends, and familiar places, which may have contributed to his rebellious nature and frequent run-ins with the law. But he admitted that he committed a lot of crimes when he was a teen because of the lack of love he received from his parents. He acted out because he wanted to get their attention. He wanted to be seen and heard because he felt unloved. And I think the things that he did do had the opposite effect, I think his actions may have made his adoptive parents feel embarrassed. And as a result, they were even more distant. They may have even began to resent him because of his rebellious ways. He even dropped out of high school when he was 17 years old, despite having an IQ of 138. Lawrence Bittaker was smart, but he felt unwanted, It was just more rebellious behavior. But again, he just wanted to get back at his family. Now, within a year of dropping out of high school, he was arrested for car theft, a hit and run accident, and evading arrest. He was soon apprehended and imprisoned in the California Youth Authority, where he remained until he was 18 years old. Now, upon release, he discovered that his adoptive parents disowned him and moved to a different state. And he never saw them again, which is going to be tough for any 18-year-old in that situation, Yet again, we have another set of parents in his mind who had given up on him. And I feel like their actions combined with his repressed anger and frustration and rage led to him committing even more offenses. And I'm sure in his mind, he felt as though, they had given up. So he's like, fuck it, I'm all in. I'm just going to do whatever I want now. They don't care. I mean, his crimes consisted of burglary, auto theft, violating his parole, and attempted murder. I mean, he had a lot of run-ins with the law and was in and out of prison. In fact, he was charged with attempted murder when he stabbed a store clerk who was trying to stop him from stealing a steak. And he may have took that steak because he was hungry, but, he may have taken it because he enjoyed the thrill of stealing, because he got to do whatever he wanted, It made him feel powerful, more in control. Either way, as a result, he was convicted for this crime and imprisoned in the California Men's Colony, a facility where he met his PIC, his toolbox buddy, Roy Norris. So to recap, Lawrence Bittaker may have felt as though he grew up in an environment where he didn't feel loved, nurtured, or protected. And as a result, he became a distant and difficult child. But who knows, perhaps his adoptive parents did try to give him that love he was looking for, but he rejected it when he didn't get what he wanted, when they just didn't give in. Or maybe they were distant and cold and passive toward him. I mean, we only have his side of the story. But from his point of view, he likely fostered feelings of rage, hatred, repressed anger, and resentment, which led to his recidivism. And I'm sure there was some form of substance abuse as well. So that combined with his childhood trauma definitely changed him and influenced his decision making. In fact, a psychiatrist classified him as being highly manipulative and unable to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. Borderline psychopath was the term used. So, yeah, antisocial personality disorder. In fact, according to FBI Special Agent John Edward Douglas, Lawrence Whitaker was the most disturbing individual for whom he'd ever created a criminal profile. And I believe that, especially from what I've gathered about the Toolbox Killers. But now let's shift our attention to Roy Norris, because there are aspects about his life that are similar to Lawrence Whitaker's, and that's where they may have found some common ground. Roy Norris was born on February 5th, 1948, in Greeley, Colorado. And his parents got married because he was born out of wedlock and they didn't want to face public scrutiny. His father worked in the scrapyard and his mom was said to be a drug addicted housewife. So there were clearly things going on behind closed doors, especially where she felt as though she had to use drugs to cope. And I say that because Roy Norris lived with his parents occasionally, but he was still placed in foster care repeatedly throughout his upbringing, which tells me that his home environment with his biological parents was dysfunctional, unstable, and turbulent. And I'm sure the constant moving had an effect on him, much like it did Lawrence Bittaker. Now, Roy Norris did admit that he was neglected and mistreated by his foster families, and he was even emotionally and physically abused. And I'm curious if he experienced the same abuse from his biological parents as well. I mean, he really didn't speak to what was going on, but one just doesn't get thrown in foster care repeatedly for no good reason. I mean, at one point, I did discover that his biological parents told him that he was an unwanted child, and I can't begin to imagine the amount of psychological damage done due to a statement like that. It's unbelievable. And he was a teen at the time. So that statement combined with his exposure to abuse, repressed anger, lack of emotional support, and unaddressed childhood trauma, I mean, all these things led him down the path that he chose. So much like Lawrence Bittaker, Roy Norris also did bad things and exhibited rebellious behavior because he wanted to be seen. He wanted to be heard because he felt unloved. And yet again, it had the opposite effect. So yeah, there were a lot of commonalities between them. And like Bittaker, when he was 17, he dropped out of high school as well. But he ended up joining the army in 1965 and served for 4 years. He was discharged because he was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. Now, schizoid personality disorder is when someone is cold, detached, apathetic, and prefers a solitary lifestyle. There's a lack of interest in social relationships. So, yeah, Roy Norris was diagnosed with this disorder and he was given an administrative discharge. Now, his individual crime centered around sexually assaulting women, which likely stemmed from his repressed anger toward his mother. And much like Bittaker, he also experienced a fair share of run ins with the law, as well as being frequently imprisoned. Hell, he was even committed to a psychiatric facility for 5 years where he was classified as a mentally ill sex offender. So he was sexually motivated and mentally ill, which isn't a good combination. But that psychiatric facility released him on probation and deemed him rehabilitated. But what happens 3 months later? He physically and sexually assaults a woman walking home from a restaurant. Soon after, Roy Norris was arrested and convicted a year later. He was then sent to the California Men's Facility, and that's where he met his PIC, his toolbox buddy, Lawrence Bittaker. So, from what I've gathered, Roy Norris was a mentally ill, sexually motivated serial rapist. And in the next video, I'll examine his methodology as well as his relationship with Lawrence Bittaker, their friendship and, that dynamic between them and the mayhem they left in their wake. But I do want to thank you guys for tuning in to part one of the Toolbox Killers. I do ask that you stab that like button and subscribe. Leave a comment, let me know what you guys think. Share this video out there, smash that bell for notifications, and if possible, avoid mayhem.